We're going to get into a really compelling story today coming out of Nepal. It's about a generation, super digitally connected, already kind of fed up with things, and then suddenly the government tries to, well, pull the plug on their online world. It raises a huge question, doesn't it? What happens when you try to silence a generation that basically lives and breathes online? Does it work, or does it just, light a bigger fire? Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the story of the 2025 Gen Z protests in Nepal. And our mission here is to really go beyond just the headlines. We want to explore all the complex layers. You've got the immediate trigger, this digital censorship, but also these deep-seated frustrations about corruption, the whole political scene. We'll look at what actually sparked it, the really innovative ways young people got organized, and importantly, the lasting impact this all had, and maybe still has, on Nepal's future.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study, honestly, because, you're looking at Nepal, a country where a huge chunk of the population is young. I think it's something like 40% under the age of 40. But traditionally, their voices often pushed to the margins in politics. So that demographic reality combined with a feeling of not being represented, it really, it set the stage perfectly for this kind of eruption.
Eruption's a good word for it. And it kicked off with something pretty dramatic, this digital blackout. September 4th, 2025, right? Nepal just suddenly blocks 26 major social media platforms. We're talking the big ones: Facebook, X, YouTube, Reddit, WhatsApp. I mean, can you imagine just that immediate feeling being cut off? The frustration must have been immense for millions who use these for, well, everything.
Oh, absolutely. Connection, news, even making a living for some. It was a really stark measure. Now, the government's official line was regulatory enforcement. They pointed to this existing directive, the Directive for Regulating the Use of Social Media, 2080. And just so listeners know, 2080, that's the Nepali calendar year. This rule basically said global tech platforms had to register, comply with Nepali law. And apparently, big players like Meta, Alphabet, they hadn't met the deadline. So the government framed it as, look, we're just asserting national sovereignty here.
Right, asserting sovereignty. Sounds like a strong, maybe even reasonable argument on the surface, but what was the actual effect of that move?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. It's what I'd almost call a sovereignty paradox. The government tries to show control over these big external actors, the foreign tech giants, right? But in doing that, they actually ended up losing a massive amount of legitimacy with their internal population, especially the youth. It's like the message was national sovereignty, but for the average young Nepali, it felt like their government was taking away their voice, their connection to the world. A real sense of betrayal, I think.
That's a huge consequence, a loss of legitimacy. Does that suggest the government just completely misread the room, misunderstood how deeply connected young people were to these platforms?
I think that's fair to say, yeah. They seem to underestimate not just the reliance, but how tangled up these platforms were in the, the social, the economic, even the political lives of young Nepalis. Cutting those connections off, it was bound to cause a backlash, a severe one.
But things weren't exactly quiet before the ban either, were they? There was another online phenomenon already picking up serious speed, maybe even laying some groundwork, the hashtag Nepo Kid or hashtag Nepo Babies trend. What was going on there?
Yes. That was huge. It was this viral campaign, mostly on TikTok and Reddit, just exploding. And what it did was expose the, often incredibly lavish lifestyles of the children of senior politicians, powerful figures. You'd see these posts contrasting luxury cars, fancy foreign degrees, designer cloaks, holidays abroad, against the backdrop of everyday Nepalese struggling with high unemployment, inflation. It took this abstract idea of corruption and made it incredibly tangible. Visceral, even.
So it wasn't just data points about corruption. It was like, here's the evidence. Look at this inequality right here.
Exactly. And for a generation where so many feel forced to go abroad for work or can't find decent jobs at home, seeing that kind of unearned luxury, it was described as deeply galling. The campaign's genius was its simplicity, really, just posing this visually driven question. Hey, these Nepo kids are flaunting this lifestyle online, but where's the money coming from? No one was explaining that part. For young Nepalese, it wasn't just about economics. It felt like their own future, their hope was being, squandered or even stolen by this elite. The opulence became a symbol of that.
And the connection wasn't lost on them. The feeling was widespread, wasn't it, that the social media ban wasn't just bad timing?
Not at all. The dominant belief among youth was that this was direct retaliation, a move to shut down the Nepo kids conversation because it was getting too uncomfortable, too powerful. It was widely seen as a cover-up, basically, just wrapped in the flag of nationalist rhetoric, using sovereignty as an excuse to silence dissent.
Okay, so we have these immediate digital triggers, the ban, the Nepo Kids backlash. But you mentioned earlier this was like fuel on an existing fire. What were those deeper underlying frustrations really boiling beneath the surface?
That's absolutely key. The protests weren't just about social media. They were like a pressure valve releasing years of built-up anger about systemic issues. And youth unemployment is probably the biggest one. The numbers are just stark. In 2023, it was officially 20.36%. That's way higher than the national average, which was already around 12.6%. And think about this statistic. Nearly 5,000 young Nepalese leave the country every single day seeking work abroad. 5,000. Because the opportunities, the decent wages, they just aren't there at home.
Wow. 5,000 a day, that's staggering. It's like a constant exodus of potential. What's driving that? What are the root causes?
It's a complex mix, according to the research. You've got limited job creation in key areas, manufacturing, agriculture, services. Economic slowdowns haven't helped, obviously. But a really big factor is this skills gap. The education system is often criticized for being too theoretical, not focused enough on practical skills, especially in like STEM fields. Then you layer on top of that a strong societal preference for white-collar jobs. So vocational trades get stigmatized, even if there's demand. Plus, gender disparities in careers and hiring, weak labor policies, not enough support for young entrepreneurs. It all adds up. It's a perfect storm, really.
A systemic failure, it sounds like. Failing to prepare young people and failing to provide for them. So with all that economic anxiety, how does this generation even try to engage politically, especially when the system seems so stuck?
Yeah, that leads right into the political disillusionment piece. There's this real challenge of what you might call chronic leadership retention. You see the same senior figures holding on to power for decades. Think about former Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Doba, his incredibly long career. Or KP Oli getting rid of a 70-year age limit for party positions, a limit he himself was passed. Pushpa Kamal Dahal, too, constantly facing calls for a transition. And the representation numbers, they tell the story. Only 12% of MPs in the House of Representatives are under 40. Yet that age group, 16-40, makes up 40% of the whole population. The largest chunk of MPs are actually 51 to 60 years old.
So a huge part of the population is effectively invisible in the halls of power.
Pretty much. And often when established parties do engage youth, it's for mobilization, show up for this rally, wave this flag, displays of strength. But they're rarely given actual leadership development, a real voice, a seat at the decision-making table. It feels like tokenism, and that just fuels more frustration, more alienation from the traditional political game. It creates this vacuum.
But we are seeing cracks in that old system, aren't we? People finding alternative routes.
Definitely. That frustration is pushing people towards new options. Look at newer parties like the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, the RSP. They actually have a much higher proportion of younger MPs. I think it was 8 out of their 20. And then the success of independent candidates like Balin Shah becoming mayor of Kathmandu, Harkasampang, and Dharan, that really signals voters are hungry for new faces, willing to look outside the established party machines.
So this generation, they're not just angry, they're getting creative. There's this different approach to dissent emerging. It's quite a shift, isn't it?
It really is. And it's not entirely out of the blue. You can draw a pretty clear line back to the Enough is Enough movement in 2020. That happened during the pandemic, and it was kind of a dry run in a way. It showed a conscious move away from Nepal's history of sometimes quite violent youth activism. It was like a strategic shift, learning how to use nonviolence, popular culture, digital tools to get visibility and build moral authority, moving away from older, more confrontational tactics.
Right, a more sophisticated, culturally savvy resistance. What did that actually look like on the streets during the 2025 protests?
You saw some really vivid stuff, unique slogans, really artistic placards, things like sanitize the government or power of the people is stronger than the people in power. There's even that one protester doing a headstand with wake up written on their leg, just visually striking, clever ways to get the message across. And music was huge. They used lyrics from popular Nepali rock and rap songs as protest chants, bands like Shadows Nepal, 1974 AD, even, quite bluntly, Need a Jew for You by Undefeated Freak Kids and Sins, that really captured the raw anger and distrust.
Using the anthems of their generation.
Exactly. And beyond that, symbolic actions too. Singing the national anthem together, really emotionally, doing yoga or headstands in public spaces, even just sitting and reading books in protest. These acts were designed to contrast with the government, to highlight, a perceived lack of seriousness or morality, and to emphasize their peaceful intent. And the organizers, especially from the Gen Z Nepal social media page, were very clear. This is nonpartisan, not tied to any party, not pro-monarchy, despite attempts by some to co-opt the movement. That was crucial for keeping it broad-based.
Very strategic, keeping it nonpartisan. Okay, so the government tries to shut down their main communication channels, Facebook, X, WhatsApp. How does a generation this plugged in react? How do you actually silence people who grew up online?
Well, the short answer is you don't. Not really. The immediate reaction was this massive VPN surge. Google Trends data showed searches for VPN for Nepal spiked something like 400% overnight. It just shows, one, incredible digital literacy, and two, a flat-out refusal to accept the state, saying you can't access this part of the internet. It's like a digital cat and mouse game, isn't it? Block one path, they find another.
Absolutely. So they bypass the blocks. Where did the conversation move?
Yeah.
What became the new digital gathering places?
Platforms like Reddit really came into their own. Subreddits, particularly Our Nepal, became these crucial sanctuaries, places for discussion, for debate, for organizing themselves in a decentralized way. You had users collectively hashing out clear demands, even creating ethical guidelines for the actual street protests, like emphasizing peace, respecting bystanders, no property damage. It fostered this collective responsibility. And this points to something important. The government's move, aimed at suppression, kind of backfired. It triggered what some call the Hydra effect. You cut off the main head, the main channels like Facebook, and instead the movement just pops up in multiple other places. Smaller, decentralized, much harder to monitor and control. It actually made the network more resilient in a way.
That's a powerful analogy, the Hydra effect. And you mentioned other, maybe less obvious digital spaces playing a role too.
Yeah, exactly. Don't underestimate the power of existing online communities. Think about Discord servers, maybe for gaming, or Nepalese in tech, or finance discussions. These places, often totally apolitical day to day, suddenly became vital hubs. They already had the social connections, the trust, the communication skills built up, so when the crisis hit, they could be activated almost instantly for sharing information, coordinating logistics, political mobilization. That latent social capital was crucial.
It's incredible how these digital ecosystems just adapted and rerouted information. But unfortunately, despite all this creativity, the peaceful protests didn't stay peaceful. Things took a really tragic, violent turn.
They did, sadly. The turning point seems to have been when the crowds grew larger and marched from Matikar Mandala, which is a really symbolic protest spot towards the federal parliament building in New Baneswar, right near the capital's political center. As they got closer, things escalated. Protesters broke through police lines, some even got onto the parliament grounds, and the state's response was immediate and, frankly, brutal. Water cannons, tear gas, rubber bullets, and then, tragically, live ammunition.
Live ammunition. The numbers reported were just devastating. What does that escalation tell us for a movement that began with headstands and hashtags to end in gunfire?
It's horrifying. It points to, I think, a severe miscalculation by the security forces, maybe panic, maybe orders from higher up, but ultimately a willingness to use deadly force on their own citizens. Reports confirmed at least 19 or 20 people killed, and the injury numbers were huge, over 100. Some reports went as high as 347 or more, many with terrible gunshot wounds, head and chest. September 8th, 2025. For many who were there or watching, it became known instantly as a Black Day.
And the protesters' view on who caused the escalation?
Overwhelmingly, they blamed the state. The narrative wasn't the youth got out of control. It was the state responded irresponsibly, lethally. There were widespread claims they used real metal bullets, despite official denials. And that led to the hashtag Hatiara Sarkar, which means murderer government, trending powerfully online. A damning indictment.
So in the immediate aftermath of that violence, that confrontation, what was the government's response? And how did others, domestically and internationally, react?
Well, politically, the Home Minister, Ramesh Lekhak, resigned pretty quickly, citing moral responsibility. That was significant. Then the government clamped down hard, imposing strict curfews in Kathmandu and other major cities like Burgunj, Bukhara, Bukwal, trying to restore order. But interestingly, perhaps realizing the sheer anger they'd unleashed, they also partially lifted the social media ban on September 8th itself, the very day of the violence. The timing feels important there.
And within Nepal, how did other institutions react?
The National Human Rights Commission stepped in, called for restraint, started an investigation. Political parties reacted too. The Rastriya Prajatantra Party, the RPP, condemned both the ban and the police violence. And you had legal figures speaking out. A former Minister of Justice, Gobind Bandi, stated very clearly that the ban itself was unconstitutional, violated basic freedoms. That added weight to the public anger. Internationally, the condemnation was swift as well. The UN Human Rights Office, OHCHR, their spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani, demanded a proper investigation into the killings. That carries weight. Amnesty International also strongly condemned the crackdown, called for an independent probe, accountability for the use of force. So significant international pressure started building on Nepal's government.
So we've taken this deep dive into Nepal's 2025 Gen Z protests. We've seen this complex mix, haven't we? Digital activism, yes, but fueled by really deep economic pain and this powerful desire for political change, for accountability. It tells us so much about power and protest today.
It really does. I think what we saw represents a major generational rupture in how civic engagement happens in Nepal. It signals this shift towards protest that's more decentralized, often doesn't have obvious leaders in the traditional sense, isn't strictly tied to one ideology. And that fundamentally challenges Nepal's long-standing political culture, which has often relied on patronage, impunity. This isn't just, another protest movement. It feels like a redefinition of where power lies less in the old structures, more in these fluid digital networks. It challenges the very foundation of how politics has traditionally worked there. And beyond Nepal's borders, these events have real consequences. There are significant economic and diplomatic risks. It could tarnish Nepal's image internationally, maybe scare off foreign investment, and it could even impact that crucial goal of graduating from the UN's least developed countries list in 2026. That's a huge deal for national development. Plus, it puts Nepal squarely within this broader trend we're seeing across South Asia youth, using digital tools to demand change, demanding a voice. It's a shared struggle.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What stands out most to you from this whole story? How does it connect to the power of digital tools everywhere? Or maybe those universal struggles young people face, trying to get their voices heard, trying to secure some kind of future?
Well, the provocative thought I'm left with is this. If young people, not just in Nepal, but potentially globally, are increasingly finding ways around traditional politics, organizing through pop culture, through these decentralized digital networks, what does that actually mean for the future of democracy itself? Will the old power structures find ways to adapt to listen, or will this cultural turn in activism just keep reshaping how change is demanded, maybe even how it's achieved? That's a huge question, I think, that democracies everywhere are going to have to wrestle with.